Thank you guys so much for being here today. I just wanted to go over a few quick things before we start. So if you guys don't know me, hello and welcome. My name is Linding. So I'm a registered counsellor, a speaker, and I'm continuing my studies to finish my master's. So the kind of work that we're doing here is a bit of a mix of psychoeducation, a bit of some practical tools, and just to help give you some insight, some language, and some practical tools that you can take with you and use in your everyday life. And I also want to be clear on something. These workshops are not a replacement for therapy. They are designed to be complementary. So as an extra support, extra learning, extra reflection, and to offer a safe, supportive space for you to come to. And just a quick note, today's session will be recorded for educational purposes. It will be put onto YouTube if you wanted to go and watch later. Only I will be in the frame, and if you do choose to share anything throughout today, it will not be recorded in the final recording at all either. So lastly, we will be discussing mental health, which of course can bring up some strong emotions. So if at any point you are feeling unwell or overwhelmed, you're free to take a breather, go outside, grab a drink, come back, or you can just leave entirely. I'm not going to be offended. It's all up to you. Just tune into what you need and honor that. So if that all sounds good, we'll begin with today. And I want to start today with a question. And you don't need to answer anything out loud, so don't stress. And I want you to think of the hardest thing that you've navigated in the last few years. So maybe a loss, maybe a failure, maybe a period where you genuinely didn't know if you were going to be okay. And then notice that you're here. You are here today. You made it through that, and maybe not perfectly, maybe not without cost, but you're on the other side of something. And what this workshop is going to ask is what actually made that possible? And can we do it deliberately enough that the next thing isn't quite as hard and doesn't cost quite as much? Before we do anything, I do want to quickly clear up the most common misunderstanding about resilience. Because most of us have been taught that to think about it in a way that the research actually tells us is very counterproductive. So when you guys hear about resilience, what comes to mind? Does anything come to mind? Like a picture of a person or a way of being? Can you guys think of anything when you think of resilience? Or what a resilient person looks like? Strong? Yeah. Strong physically, mentally?
Anything.
Yeah,
Strong,
very capable.
Yeah.
Confident? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We have capable, strong, confident, maybe also somebody who doesn't flinch when they get knocked down, someone who holds everything together, and someone who pushes through without complaint, tears, or needing anything from anyone. Those are sort of like the images that we have, right? And for many people, that sort of image gets internalized early. And coping well becomes synonymous with not falling apart, not burdening others, keeping the lid on, and not letting anything spill over. And James Gross at Stanford University has studied 30 years worth of emotional regulation, and he identified two strategies that we use unconsciously without realizing. The first one is suppression. So this is pushing the feelings down. So trying to show that you're fine. From the outside, it looks like somebody who's managing well and is quite strong, as we were talking about, but maybe physiologically, their heart rate is still elevated, it's still up, and their cortisol is still going. Their body is then paying the price for the mind avoiding this. So think of it's basically like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, right? You can hold it underwater and you can put pressure on it, but as soon as you sort of slightly start to lose your grip, it just explodes upwards, right? The same sort of thing is with suppression. It ends up just exploding. The second way we can do it, the second one is reappraisal. So this is genuinely changing how you interpret a situation. So when does that matter? So this physiological stress response actually reduces when we do this. And the body calms down because the brain has processed the signal that the body was subconsciously suppressing. The goal is never to feel less. The goal is to move through those things more effectively. And there's a pattern that I've seen way too many times. It's someone who's prided themselves on never asking for help and never showing a single sign of struggle. And for a long time, it worked and life was cooperative. Then something challenging happened, a diagnosis, a loss, a failure that they weren't expecting, and they found themselves completely at a loss because they had never practiced this, even though they were very capable people. So they had no tools for emotional regulation, they had no community, no language for what they were feeling. Resilience that hasn't been practiced, it can be quite fragile because it's never been implemented or practiced or trained before. And what resilience actually is. So there's 4 things that the research shows. So firstly, it's a dynamic and learnable process. The APA defines resilience not as a personality trait, but a process of adapting well in the face of adversity. So people who believe capacities are fixed recover much slower from setbacks than those who believe that they can develop. And this is not something you either have or don't have, it is something that is built. And then secondly, it is built from ordinary resources. So not sort of extraordinary traits or circumstances. Researcher Ann Matston coined the term ordinary magic. So after decades of research studying people who thrived in their lives despite facing serious adversity, the sources were almost always ordinary. So close relationships, basic routines, small competencies, and a sense of meaning. And these ingredients we almost already have all the time. They're already present. They're just in our psychological pantries. What changes is whether you can see them and draw on them deliberately. And then thirdly, it is fundamentally relational. Harvard study of adult development, so that's 80 years worth of research, found that one factor was more predictive of resilience, health, and longevity than any other, and that is the quality of close relationships. So it's not wealth, it's not intelligence, it's not status, it is the quality of your close relationships. Loneliness research tells us that isolation activates the same neural threat circuits as physical pain. When we're lonely, we experience physical pain. We are not built for a solitary life. The idea that we should cope alone, that is somehow what makes us strong and resilient, is one of the most evolutionary, confusing ideas that has ever been produced. It makes absolutely no sense. And then fourth, it is rooted in meaning. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, said that those most likely to survive the Holocaust were not the physically strongest. They were those who maintained a sense of meaning, a purpose, and a connection to something beyond themselves. This was later validated by other research, showing that purpose acts as a psychological anchor. It doesn't make hard things easier, but it makes them easier to navigate and manage. So we need purpose, and it doesn't have to be grand either. So it can be your children, your creativity, a value that you refuse to abandon, a community that you're fighting for, a passion. The source of it actually matters a lot less than the relative value for you. That is what matters, how much it's valuable to you, not what it is. And most of us tend to think of resilience as a shield. If I put this up, nothing can come at me and I am safe, right? That is something that blocks everything and anything from coming near me. But the hardest things always seem to get through. They always seem to find the smallest little crack in that shield, right? At least it feels that way. And maybe that's because it's not actually a shield. The research shows that resilience is actually more like a muscle. So it's a shield is a passive thing. Meanwhile, a muscle is built and is through repeated, manageable stress followed by recovery. Stress without recovery, that's just damage. That's not very helpful. Recovery without stress, well, then you're just comfortable and there's no real reason to grow, right? It's the combination of stress followed by recovery that builds the capacity for resilience. So before you can regulate stress, you have to be able to notice it. Most of us are either too busy distracting ourselves 24/7 or we're running on autopilot all the time. The stress then accumulates beneath the surface, and we only become aware of it when it starts overflowing the bucket. And here's why that happens, the neuroscience of it. Deep inside the brain sits a little amygdala. So this is your threat detector. And it is very fast, and it fires way before your rational brain has a chance to respond. Research shows that there is a 200 millisecond gap between the amygdala firing and your prefrontal cortex, which is basically your thinking brain, the ability to process things, even comes online. So there's a huge gap before you react physically, before you can even think. Your body is already responding to the stress that your unconscious mind hasn't even had a chance to catch up yet. And you can notice that especially when you're in traffic. Like, think about the last time you were cut off in traffic. Before you had even formed a single thought like, oh my God, this was so annoying, or that was really dangerous, your heart rate had already increased. Basically, you've slammed your brakes already, your jaw had already clenched, you're already tightening around the steering wheel before you had even formed a thought. The body always moves first and responds first before the mind can. And so that's why trying to just think positively doesn't work. The body is already in threat mode. So no amount of reframing is going to get through to that nervous system that believes it's in danger. You'd have better luck trying to ask a brick wall whether it wants to be painted red or yellow. You're not going to get much out of it. So the skill that we're trying to build here is called interoceptive awareness, the ability to read your own internal signals in real time. So it's not a do-all end-all thing, it's not going to fix everything, but it's considered a very strong foundation for everything else to rest on. But why? Because you can't navigate what you can't see. The Titanic couldn't navigate around that iceberg because it couldn't see it. So how do we begin to see it? The nervous system speaks to us in 4 languages. And yes, we do listen through all 4, but most of us, if not always, has either a dominant one or one that sends signals first before the others. And so what are these 4 channels? So we have the body. So how does that show up? How do you feel that? So that could be a tight chest, shallow breathing, your jaw clenching, stomach dropping, a heat in your face, maybe showing fatigue, your heart's racing, you're sweating, you're shaking. Then we also have emotions. So these are the actual emotions that you feel. So anxiety, irritability, shame, sadness, overwhelm, etc. There's a plethora of emotions. If this is your primary one, it is vital to name it as specifically as possible, not just like stress, but what is causing the stress, what exact emotion is causing that stress. Then we have thoughts. So this can look like catastrophizing, self-blaming, replaying things, saying things like, I can't cope, future spinning, spiraling, ruminating. And then lastly is behaviors. So that looks like withdrawing, snapping, overworking, avoiding, scrolling, drinking, distracting, distancing. All of these things are behaviors. So what I want you to bring to mind now is a current sort of real stressing situation, maybe not the biggest one in your life, but something with emotional charge, but that's moderate. And you're not sharing this with anyone, so rest assured, it's just saying private for now. And I want you to notice in your body as you think on this. If you turn to the first page of your workbook, we'll fill out there. I want you to notice in yourself, when you think on this situation, in your body, what do I notice physically that's going on? In your emotions, what am I feeling? In your thoughts, what is your mind saying? And your behaviors, what are you doing or not doing and avoiding? If you can, try to be specific. It's not stressed, but where in the body and what does it feel like? What kind of emotion? And the exact thought that your mind keeps returning to. The more specific you get, the more insight you'll get. So I'll give you guys some time to write a list of things now. When you were thinking about this, did you notice which one you noticed first? Did you notice your body first? Sort of emotional sensation? Yeah? Who noticed their body first? Interesting. Did anyone notice their thoughts first? Their thoughts were the first thing that came to mind. No. All right. What about emotions? Was an emotion that came to mind first? Yeah. Any behaviors? No. Okay. That is also very interesting because we all experience stress differently, right? And we all feel it differently. We all have a different internal landscape. Is there one that maybe you found very difficult to think on or to come up with? Was anybody having trouble coming up with something for the body, for the way that you felt? Anyone having trouble coming up with the thoughts going through your head? Somewhat. What about your emotions? Emotions, yeah. Behaviors then, what you're doing or not doing? I think that one's probably one of the easier ones actually. And I wanted to mention that as well, because the one that we tend to skip or not notice as much can sometimes actually hold the most information for us. And it's where we need to sort of practice a little bit more with. And it's very interesting that you both all mentioned body, because the thing that I see most with this activity is that people actually have a lot more in the thoughts column, is the most filled up one, and the body column actually sometimes has the least. So a lot of people are usually very disconnected from their bodies, but it's wonderful that we actually have a lot of people connected to their bodies in this room. Because sometimes the sort of like analysis that's cycling up here doesn't make contact with the sort of physical sensation that's coming on underneath, which is usually where it's coming from. And what I want you to take from this is the stress audit. It only takes 60 seconds. So it's those 4 channels. So your body, your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors. And it's just 2 questions. Which did I notice first? And then which did I skip? In different circumstances, you may notice different things as well. So you can do it in a car before a difficult conversation, or in a bathroom before a hard meeting. Maybe, and the aim really isn't to try to like fix anything here. Maybe you will in the process, but it's just about trying to read your nervous system a little bit more. And the research shows that simply by naming what you're experiencing, saying this is anxiety, rather than just like, I'm overwhelmed and I'm stressed, rapidly reduces the amygdala's response. So that threat response goes down. So that naming itself in itself becomes a way to regulate. And there's something also really worth knowing about your brain, that it doesn't actually work, it doesn't actually work like a camera. It doesn't record reality as it is. It constructs a story about reality based on your past experience, based on your current emotional state, on the information that is available to you right now. It constructs a story. And then it presents that story to you on a silver platter as if that were the only reality that exists. That is just the fact of the matter. Which means that what you experience is always, to some degree, an interpretation. And under stress, that's the really critical part. Under stress, that interpretation is systematically biased towards threat. And that's one of the most replicated findings in emotional regulation. It is rarely the event that determines our stress level. So it's not the thing that happened, it is the meaning that we assign to it. That is what creates our stress. James Cross at Stanford, so that researcher that we mentioned earlier, identified cognitive reappraisal as one of the most effective regulation strategies available to us. By genuinely examining the story your brain is telling you and asking whether it's 110% sure, is this really accurate? When people do that, the psychological stress response reduces because the brain actually processed the situation differently and not suppressed it or quickly moved past it and then the body follows. So it's not positive thinking. We're not looking for silver linings here. We're not pretending that the hard things aren't hard. They definitely are. But we're asking one precise question. Is my first interpretation the only one possible? Is it even the most accurate one? Our first interpretation under stress, I want to consider as usually just a draft. And like any draft, it can be examined and marked for accuracy. Did anyone just get flashbacks from school? Because I definitely did writing this. I was just seeing the red pen marks everywhere on the notes. Because here's a scenario that people recognize almost immediately and I want to put off to the room, right? You send a message to a close friend and they don't reply. Maybe an hour passes, a couple of hours, it's the next day, maybe 3 days later, and you still haven't heard anything from them. Your brain doesn't just take that silence of them not responding and just leaves it at that. It generates a story usually, and automatically. And what's that story? Can you guys think of a time when that's happened to you? You've sent a message to somebody and they've just haven't replied for days, and you've just been thinking about all the list of things that could be going wrong. Have we all been there? Does anyone want to say anything like what they thought of in those times that seemed completely ridiculous? Yeah, thinking that it's your own fault and you did something that, yeah, something's wrong with, and they just interpreted it like, oh no, they didn't interpret it the way I thought they would. Yeah, of course, we all end up doing that. And it's so interesting that we all have these universal thoughts as well. You know, they're annoyed at me, something maybe happened to them, maybe they're just busy. It's just one simple thing, the same scenario, somebody didn't respond, and yet so many different stories can come with it. And they all affect us differently, right? Each of those stories creates a completely different emotional experience within you. Some of them are more severe than others. If you just say, oh, they're just busy, you probably aren't going to be as mad as it if they're going like, oh my God, I said something wrong, they're angry at me. That's very different levels of stress within you that these stories can create. And none of them are fact yet. That's the thing, none of them are fact. Every single one is a hypothesis. The brain's draft, which was generated in milliseconds, but then taken as the fact of the matter. So reappraisal is basically asking the question, which story is the most accurate, given what I actually know? So in most cases, what we actually know is far less than what the story we've come up with implies. We don't know if the other person is upset, angry, if we've said something wrong, if they're busy or annoyed, or maybe they just lost their phone. We do not know. We can only find out when if they tell us later, but for right now, all we know is they haven't responded. That is the fact without any story attached. They have not responded. That's very difficult to sit with sometimes. But we're going to practice this now. So what I have up here is 4 situations. I tried to pick some universal situations that maybe everyone has at least felt something. I want you to pick one of them that maybe you felt something either similar or you have been in that situation before. So we have one, you presented an idea at work or somewhere else and nobody responds to you. Secondly, a close friend maybe or someone else, family member just cancels last minute again. So we had that third one. So you make a significant mistake and maybe at work or somewhere else and someone high up finds out or someone finds out that you're not really happy with finding out. 4, so you've been trying to make a change for months and you still haven't followed through. Pick one of these if you can, or if none of these resonate with you or you can't even feel a connection to any of them or sort of even feel like it's similar to what you've experienced, don't worry. If you can come up with something else, do that instead. So I want you to, on the second page, I want you to pick that scenario and I want to bring you back to that moment if you can. And I want you to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10 of how distressing that felt for you. So 0 being not distressing at all, you could be on the beach in the Bahamas on a perfect holiday. 10 being the most distressing thing you've ever experienced. 0 through 10, and then I want you to write down the first story that you have with this. What's the first story that your mind comes up with? So we're going to have you guys pair up. I'm glad we have even numbers today. That works out very well. And I want you to share your automatic interpretation with, so that story, that first story, I want you to share that with your partner. And together, I want you to generate 2 alternative interpretations. So just genuinely plausible interpretations, something else that could be a plausible way to think about this or to see it. So if you can, have 4 in total, so that's 2 each. If you can come up with more, all the better. Just try asking each other, what else could this mean? What would you say to a close friend who was going through this and who told you this? So, did you guys difficult to come up with sort of other alternative stories? bit difficult?
We didn't really get that.
Just chatting.
Oh no, we're talking about the problem.
Yeah.
It's just,
No, that's fine. It happens. That's fine. But I wanted to ask, did anyone, out of these 4, did anyone pick any of these as something similar to them? Okay, could we maybe get some alternative interpretations up here, if somebody wants to share? So everyone processes things differently and interprets things differently in different ways. So maybe coming at it one way isn't sort of like hitting the cognitive ways that they're able to understand it. That could be one way, yeah, definitely. And then people need more time to actually process what's being said and not be put on the spot as much, going like, is this a good idea? Oh gosh, I don't know. Can I come back to you on that after I've, thought about it a little bit? Yeah, perfect. Anything else for any of these others, or the same? Not as much? Not for these ones. Did you have anything else? Any other sort of like, did you want to share a little bit about the story and then the sort of Yeah, that is honestly very, very common as well. But I think even like, you already came up with some alternative scenarios, but you even said like, it still spirals, right? And that definitely happens. The way that I kind of see it is that and what this exercise is trying to get you to do as well, is just trying to create that little pause, a little tiny pause where you go like, okay, chances are, like if we look at this very logically, probably like the chances of him being dead, probably not the highest up there. And so then you can allow the other ones to come in, and that stress level still may be high, but maybe it's not crisis mode, he is dead, right? So even if it's still heightened, which of course a message from him would solve everything, it would just make it so much easier. But it's just like, it's still, if we can just bring it down a little bit, that's still better for your body and for your nervous system to even just be instead of being in that total complete crisis state where you can't function at all. So I understand, and of course, as you said, like a message is probably the only thing that's going to actually solve that issue. But it's just creating that tiny little bit of a gap where you can come down just a little bit. That would be the best solution in that instance, because then at least it's not going to completely ruin you, and you do have other situations that could be going on. You have evidence that he's done this before and he came back alive somehow. He still made it back home. So you have evidence to draw on as well. So again, yeah, it's not a do-all end-all, like it's not going to be like this is going to fix everything, but it could still just bring down that reaction just a little bit, making it from a 10 distressing level to at least maybe just like a 9 or an 8 at least. So that was actually what I wanted to come back to. So, because underneath that on your books, we're actually going to rate it again. So now that we've kind of come up with some alternative sort of ways of thinking, rate it again on that stress level of 0 to 10. Has it changed or has it not changed?
I think can I just say that maybe it's changed, but now instead of being now I'm angry as well as
Yep. Yeah, definitely, because that still happens. So yeah, the emotion behind it could change. That's also something. However, would you rate that anger as distressing as the fear of him being dead? Probably not as high, yeah. So it can still change, it can transform, it can move into different ways, but it's still just going to bring that level down, maybe even just a tiny little smidge. Hopefully, that's the kind of like the hope of that activity. Okay, who noticed that number did go down? Even by just like 1 or 2. Who noticed it didn't move at all? Yeah, and that can happen too. So sometimes that first reading of the situation is accurate. Maybe you've already pondered on it and you've already thought about all of these things before. The whole point of this is just to pause long enough to check if it is accurate, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're just spiraling in our thoughts. So it's just enough to create that pause to check. So rather than building, your entire story based on that, and emotional experience based on that story that your brain's accumulated on that first draft. And I also want you to notice that we did that reframe together. Sometimes we can just end up talking and spiraling and continuing with the story, but a lot of the time, most of us found it easier to generate ideas for another person than it is for ourselves. Under stress, our vantage point becomes really narrowed and limited. We get blinders on and we have blind spots. We're inside the situation. We're not able to see outside. We need another perspective sometimes because that's how human cognition works very well. It's collaborative. So what would you say to a close friend who's going through something like this? That is a very well used psychological question in a lot of psychology. So it's a very good trick to ask yourself that when you just feel your stress levels a bit too high. And Viktor Frankl said, so that's the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, he said that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space between stimulus and response is your power to choose that response. And that is what we just practiced. We practiced creating that space before that response. That's what this exercise was meant to do. And the question that does that is simple. It's just, what else could this mean? What else could be happening? So it's just 5 words. So one moment, just try it once this week, a moment where your brain is just already constructing a story, and just ask that question before that structure goes up and gets solidified. And you don't need 10 alternatives. Like, this was just a practice to come up with a few, just to get your brain sort of like thinking on it, but you don't need 10. Like, you don't need a lot, you don't need 2, or you don't even need 1. Sometimes just that question itself can create that pause before that structure goes permanently up. And I want to come back to something now that the researcher Anne Matten found, because I think it's such a radical idea when it comes to resilience. After decades of studying people who navigated serious adversity, people who had every reason not to be okay, but were, she kept finding the same conclusion. The sources of their resilience was often never something extraordinary or really unexpected. What carried them through was very ordinary. A relationship, a routine, a belief they refused to let go of, a small reaction that they kept, something that they kept doing that even felt just pointless at times, a way of thinking to themselves that had become a survival skill. And she called it ordinary magic. The magic, she said, isn't in the ingredient itself. So it's not the thing. It's in finally being able to see it. And how do human beings adopt new behaviors? We adopt strategies most readily when we see other people like us using them. So not experts, not researchers, not people on stages, maybe you can get something from them too, but genuinely it just comes from somebody who's in the same situation as us. People like us, with our constraints, with our own circumstances, with our own messy and complicated lives. When someone who lives something like your life says, this is what helped me, that clicks in a very different way from something that you've read in a book. It feels more available and actually useful. And so that's what we're going to create right now. We're going to create a collection of real strategies and mindsets of everyone in this room. So we're going to have sticky notes. You can see here we've got yellow and blue. And what I want you guys to do is, on a yellow sticky note, I want you to write down an action, a strategy, a behavior that helped you through something hard. So something external, something you did. And then on a blue note, a mindset, a belief, an inner attitude that helped you. So something internal, a way you were thinking or a conviction that you held. And I want you to write something that maybe you almost wouldn't include. So maybe it just feels too small, too obvious, too strange. Maybe a part of you was thinking like, I don't even know if this is like a legit strategy. It's just something I kind of do and it works. That's something too. If you have more ideas, don't just limit yourself to one for each. You can just keep going, keep letting that creative juices flow. But see if you can come up with one for each that you personally use for yourself. So I'll give you guys 3 minutes and I'll write something too. What I want to do is I want to read a couple of these out loud so we can all kind of get a feel for some of these. Are you happy with that? Is there any that you don't want me to read? All happy? Okay. If you hear something that resonates, so something that you have felt before, thought before, Maybe it's your note, or maybe you feel like, you know what, that's actually really good, I like that. I want you guys to raise your hands if you can. So let's have a look. So this mindset of 1 hour or just one day at a time. So who said that to themselves and felt like that really worked for them? Yeah, I think I have too. Just one day at a time, just one day at a time. Get close to God, positive talking, reading the Bible, and being just thankful and overall grateful. Feel that one as well? Listening to others reading, putting it on a sticky note, putting it on a sticky note on the mirror so I can be reminded of those words. Yeah, that's wonderful, yeah. Getting informed, I think. So educating yourself and learning a little bit more. Mindset of often it gets worse before it gets better, but it will get better. That's very nice, that one too. Let's see, walking away as well. So knowing when you need to walk away from something. I have a bit of a list here. So sleep, note to yourself, reflecting on the day, written, walking, music, seeing dogs play, meditation, watching comedy shows. All of those things are very good as well. Let's see, be in nature, sleep. So this is a learning experience. Everything is a blessing or a lesson. I will be okay. Feeling that something has happened, that if something has happened, it only happened now because I have the tools to face it. I won't read the rest out. I'm going to leave that up here because I want you guys to, after today, take a photo of this wall. And I love this recognition of your experience because it's also uniquely yours, yet also universal at the same time. And I hope that maybe that reduced some of the feelings of isolation that can come with this, that so often makes those hard things just feel harder. So 2 questions before we close that I do want to open up to the room. What surprised you about today? Has anything surprised you? Something maybe that you wrote yourself, that you thought yourself, that you heard maybe from someone else? Has anything surprised you today? Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So it's like knowing that like so many other people like are going through something hard too, so you don't feel so alone. Yeah, that's beautiful. Anything else? Yeah, of course. That's what I mean. Like we're so individual and yet all of these things are so universal at the same time, but we just don't realize it. We just don't know that and we don't realize it. We think we're so alone in this sometimes, but that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to get this to be an open room and just see that like everyone is still processing things very similarly. Anything else? Yes, that one little pause. Yeah, definitely. That's wonderful too. And then is there anything off this wall that you haven't tried before that you want to borrow that maybe I mentioned? Yeah, from the sticky notes. Yeah, just the sticky notes, yeah. Yeah. Putting them up around your house, you mean?
Yeah.
And the thing is about this word, I love the word borrow here. And that's what I think is the right way to go about this as well, because we're not appropriating other people's experiences with this. You're learning from the people around you, you know, which is what humans do best. Adapting what works and building on each other, which is how we build resilience. So simply putting a difficult situation into words, even just to yourself, like we were saying before, it can measurably reduce those stress hormones that you're feeling. And in a social context, it can become even more compounded. And Brené Brown's research adds to this, saying that it's not strength that connects people, it is the willingness to be honest about that struggle that connects people. So it's the honesty that creates belonging. And every note on this wall was an act of honesty. Every hand that went up, and I did it on purpose, was an act of generosity. Saying to the person who wrote that note, I heard you, I feel you, I've been there too. And that's what I wanted to get. That exchange in itself is building resilience as well. The research keeps pointing to the same thing. It keeps pointing to that above all else, is that resilience is not built alone. It is built in relationships. It is built in communities, in rooms like this, where people are willing to be honest about the hard things and what it's cost them and what has actually helped them. So before you leave today, 2 things with this wall. 1, take a photo. As we said before, the whole thing, it belongs to all of you. This is your hard-won wisdom on this wall. All of your life wisdom on this wall right now. So, and it's honesty from everyone in this room. So that's really rare. So I want you to keep that. And then I want you to, if you can, choose one that's not yours and try to implement it this week. So maybe a mindset or a strategy. Try it in the next 7 days, just see what's possible, just give it an experiment, even just as an experiment. What have we done today? So we started in the body, just as a reflection. We started in the body. We mapped a real stressor in real channels, across those 4 channels. So your body, your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors. You found which one you tend to go to first. Maybe that's just for that specific situation. It could change depending on the situation. And you found which one that you typically end up skipping. And so the technical term for that is interoceptive awareness, which is what we mentioned before. And research says that people who are accurately able to detect and label their internal states regulate their emotions much more effectively and recover from stress more quickly. Because then you can work with your emotions rather than being driven by them. And then we moved into the mind. So you practice that cognitive reappraisal, examining the automatic story that your brain generates under stress and asking whether it's actually fully accurate, whether it's complete, whether it's the only way to see this situation. People who use the reappraisal show lower rates of anxiety and depression and greater well-being across all areas. With time, it becomes something that you don't really need to force yourself to think about doing. It becomes automatic. And then we did something together. You put your hard-won wisdom on a wall. You saw it reflected back in everybody raising their hands. You discovered that your experience of hard things is never as isolated as maybe it has felt until now. And articulating that difficult experience, giving it language, measurably reduces your stress hormones. And so there's one little thing I want to talk about before we go, and that's about self-criticism. So being hard on yourself after a failure, maybe. It actually activates the same threat responses as external danger, as physical pain, as we were talking about. Your cortisol rises, your heartbeat stays higher, your nervous system goes into protection mode. And from that state, you can't really reflect and you can't really grow as much. But self-compassion is the opposite of that, right? Where you're treating yourself with the same basic kindness that you would to a friend who was struggling. And that activates the caregiving system instead. So it's calm, safety, and from that state you can actually process what happened and move forward more effectively. And the harshest inner critics take the longest to recover because they never give themselves the safety that they need to actually process what happened. So alongside everything today, truly just talk to yourself with the kindness that you would extend to a friend that was going through something similar to you. Give yourself that kindness. You really do deserve it. None of what we've covered today requires any sort of dramatic life overhaul. The most durable habits aren't built on willpower, they're built on discipline. They're built on smallness. So it's sort of these tiny behaviors that you can attach onto existing behaviors that you have, that are practiced continuously. So motivation follows action better than action follows motivation. So you don't wait until you feel ready. You do something small and then the feeling will follow. So that's what I mean. I'm not asking for a life overhaul. I'm asking for just 3 small things this week. So to try the stress audit. So when you notice your stress level starting to rise, just notice those 4 channels. So your body, your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors. And then those 2 questions. What did you skip? And what did you go to first? And then asking that question, what else could this mean? Just to create that pause, a moment where your brain, before the brain starts to make that story concrete. And then something from the borrowed notes. So try one strategy or one mindset this week and just as an experiment to just give it a go, see what works. And resilience, again, sadly, doesn't mean that you won't struggle. It doesn't mean that the hard things won't be hard. It means that you've built and are continuing to build the internal and relational infrastructure to meet that difficulty better, to meet that difficulty well, to move through it without being defined by it, to come out the other side knowing that what you didn't know before. So with that, thank you all for coming and being in this room today, for your honesty and for your notes as well. Thank you.